Good morning, everyone. And of course, happy Diwali to our Indian guests. Hope you had a good night. So, let's look at today's itinerary then. First, we will take a guided walk of the historic city center of Dresden. It was reduced to rubble in February 1945 and has been lovingly rebuilt. Afterwards, we will see the historic rooms and the museums of the Dresden State Art Collections in the former royal palace. Then, after lunch, we will carry on to the wonderful Saxon Switzerland National Park. We will visit Königstein Fortress, which was never conquered. And then we will carry on to the famous Bastei rock formation. This is also the place where we're going to have our dinner at the Panorama restaurant. So you have an exciting day ahead of you and a longer one than yesterday. So let's start and go on our guided walk. Let's do a walk of the beautiful historic city center of Dresden, starting here at Carola Bridge, overlooking the bend on the river with the famous skyline of Dresden. There you can see many famous buildings, like the Church of Our Lady of Frauenkirche, the Royal Palace, the Cathedral, the Semper Opera House. We will see them all from closer later. So how did Dresden become what it is today? Let's look at the name first. Dresden comes from the Slavic word Dresdani, which means people living in a swampy area. When the Germans arrived here, there were settlements of Slavic people on both sides of the river, and these areas were swampy indeed. So why did they come here? Well, the traders needed to cross the Elbe River. And between this bridge and the next one, there was a shallow spot where you could wade through the water if the water level was low enough. Soon, a wooden bridge was built, and to protect this bridge, a small castle was erected. And then the wooden bridge was replaced with a stone bridge. So Dresden, the town that developed around the castle, was first mentioned in 1206. After that, the town developed steadily. But until the 15th century, Dresden was not considered to be important, and it was hardly ever mentioned. It all changed when brothers Ernst or Ernest and Albrecht or Albert ruled Saxony together as their father wished them to do. You can see their father here in the middle of the two, holding their hands to seal their unity. This arrangement worked very well for 21 years. Both of them loved Dresden, and they enlarged the old castle into a small palace. However, at the same time they also built the Albrechtsburg in Meißen, Germany's first palace. In 1485 they decided to divide up Saxony after all, and Albert, the younger of the brothers, chose the eastern half of the territory and made Dresden his new capital. Albert's grandson, Moritz or Morris, arguably the best ruler Saxony ever had, won the elector title in the middle of the 16th century. He and later his brother Augustus turned Dresden into a modern city of the Renaissance. They also erected the mighty fortifications of which some of the parts still remain today. They also turned the small palace into a much larger representative one. Let's go and take a look at it. Maurice doubled the size of the palace, and after his death, his brother Augustus carried on. At the end, the whole palace was decorated with graffiti on the outer walls. A later Augustus Augustus the Strong gave the whole palace a Baroque appearance, and around 1900 the palace was renovated again and gained the present neo-Renaissance facade. However, in the rebuilding of the royal palace, it was decided to recreate this graffito decoration in the large yard of the palace. What a sight the palace must have been in the Renaissance times. Dresden now became an interesting city with many beautiful Renaissance buildings. The one you see behind me owes its existence to a phenomenon that we are all very familiar with: ever-growing bureaucracy. Even the large palace of Maurice and Augustus wasn't big enough in the end, and so this was erected, the first Saxon chancery. The successors of Augustus were not as capable as he was, but at least they built this very beautiful stable yard of the royal palace. The stable yard is also an authentic medieval knights tournament place. To my left and to my right, you can see the original poles which were used for jousting. The knights tournaments were an important practice for war and also a form of entertainment. But the stable yard was also used for hunting. Well, not hunting as we know today. In fact, the animals were driven into the stable yard. They had been caught before, and then here the noble people would shoot them at point blank after they had been slowed down by a water pool. Not a noble way to hunt animals. But you can see the heads of the animals which still remind us of this practice. What you see here on the side is the so-called long hall. On the other side, of course, is the procession of princes that we already encountered. In the 17th century, the 30-year war broke out between the Catholic and the Protestants, and Saxony was devastated. Saxony recovered much faster than other regions in Germany due to the mines in the Ore Mountains. And slowly the age of Baroque dawned. Enter Augustus the Strong. Real name Friedrich August or Frederick Augustus the First of Saxony. In 1694 he became the ruler of Saxony when his brother died unexpectedly from a disease. 3 years later, he also became King of Poland. He was a very well-educated man, particularly in the field of architecture, and he had traveled Europe extensively on a cavalier tour. And he immediately set out to turn Dresden into a modern and representative city of Baroque. We are here at Neumarkt Square, the new market square. And you can see, if you look around, how the citizens followed suit in changing the face of the city. Well, but then there was still the small matter of the church which dominates the square. The Frauenkirche, or Church of Our Lady, had fallen into disrepair and needed to be replaced. Augustus donated a lot of money for this. Why? It was not his business anyway, because when he had become King of Poland, he had become a Catholic as well. And that as the ruler of the motherland of the Reformation. That's the thing he was never forgiven for. If you look at the procession of princes today, you see his horse trampling a flower, the Luther rose. Anyway, so it was the city's business to erect a new church. the architect George Baer faced the challenge that he had to build a much larger church on the same space. That's why he built a very tall church. When he suggested to build a large dome on top of the church, Augustus the Strong must have been very pleased. Even though Dresden today is known as the Florence on the Elbe River, due to his beautiful architecture and the fantastic art collections, he wanted to erect the Venice of the North. And if you look at the church, think Venice. So the famous stone bell of Dresden came into existence. The Church of Our Lady is a Protestant church, and in fact is the most perfect example of a church built to the ideals of the reformer Martin Luther, with the people gathered around the word, the pulpit. Like the whole city center of Dresden, the Church of Our Lady was destroyed in February 1945. The bombs couldn't do it any harm, but the church caught fire from the inside, burned out, and eventually the dome collapsed into the church, leaving only ruins. After German reunification, the church was rebuilt with donations from all over the world, using as many of the old stones as possible. If you look at the church, you can see it. The old stones have the black color, while the new ones have a bright sandstone color. Eventually the whole church will turn black, because the sandstone from Saxon Switzerland contains iron and manganese oxides, which will change the color again in the long run. I can still remember the night when the church was opened. I was watching it on television and I thought, I'm living in the city, I have to be there. So I came here and stood in line for hours in the freezing cold to be one of the first to see the church from the inside. What a wonderful moment. The tower of the Church of Our Lady offers wonderful views. There's a separate entrance to get up to the tower and you have to pay a fee for it, but it's really worth it. The ascent is not as difficult as it seems because there's an elevator which takes you up at more than halfway, and then there's an easy walk up. We are in the lower part of the church. This was originally the burial site. When the church was rebuilt, this was used for church services starting from 1996, while work continued above us. Today, this is the room of silence. The church is also a symbol of reconciliation. A good example is the cross that you see on top of the church. Later, the old cross was found in the rubble, and it's now inside the church. But the new cross was made by the son of a bomber pilot who took part in the air raid in February 1945. And there were also people in other countries who did a lot to have the church rebuilt. Thank you, world, for your support. The reconstruction of the church sparked the rebuilding of the whole area with reconstructions, buildings with historical facades and modern additions. Some people claimed that Augustus the Strong had 365 children. Well, that is not true. Even though he was a ladies' man, he only had 8 official children. Maybe there were a few more, but 8 were official. One was the son that he had with his wife, and the others were the children that he had with his mistresses. And he took very good care of all of them. His most famous mistress was Countess Anna Constantia von Cosel. She was declared the official woman on his left. But since his wife moved away from Dresden because she couldn't bear being with the mistresses and bear the fact that he had become a Catholic, she was basically the woman on his side. Naturally, she couldn't stay in the royal palace with him. But right opposite the royal palace, he gave her the Taschenberg Palace. I always say, just big enough for a lady and her shoes. But don't get carried away. She only had the middle section at that time. Anyway, she fell out of favor at some point because she got involved in politics, and then she was imprisoned in Stolpen Castle for the rest of her life. The Taschenberg Palace is today Dresden's leading hotel, and we're gonna have a look inside. Come, follow me. Augustus the Strong had many building projects. Some of them never became a reality. He wanted to build a new palace, which would have been bigger than Versailles and which would have incorporated this, the Dresden Zwinger. What does this name Zwinger mean? Well, it's a military term that denotes the space between two walls of the fortification. in case the enemy had breached the first wall, he would still be trapped in the space between the two walls and could be defeated there. Bezwingen, yeah, that's where the name comes from. Here at this space, the idea of Augustus was to create an open space for festivities. Then he had an orangery built, and after that more and more buildings were added, which was soon the home of his ever-growing collections. Behind me you can see the crown gate. The crown you see on top is not the Saxon crown, but he was King of Poland, so this is the Polish crown, and you find it all over the Zwinger. In the buildings today you find some of the museums of the Dresden State Art Collection, like the porcelain collection, which is the best in the world, the Royal Cabinet of Mathematical and Physical Instruments, and a museum on the history of the Zwinger itself. What makes the Zwinger one of the most famous buildings of the Baroque age is the beautiful architecture by Matthäus Daniel Pöppelmann and the sculptures by the workshop of Balthasar Permoser. Augustus the Strong's son, also called Augustus, also became King of Poland. He did not build as much as his father, but he erected the Catholic cathedral, the former Catholic court church. Since he was a Catholic ruler of a Protestant country, he did not want to offend his people. So in the bell tower, for the first centuries, there were no bells. And processions, a typical Catholic feature, were done indoors in a specially built-in procession path. The theatre square only took shape in the 19th century, when Dresden had become a very rich and highly industrialized city. Brilliant young architect Gottfried Semper built a new building for the Old Masters Picture Gallery, which is one of the best in the world. To get into there, you need a ticket for the museums in the Zwinger or the ticket for all museums. The most famous painting is the Sistine Madonna by Raphael, with the two cherubs at the bottom. Most people in the world know these two cherubs, but not too many can place them with this painting and with Dresden. Semper also erected a groundbreaking new theatre, but it was destroyed by fire and replaced by this one behind me, which is still one of the most beautiful and most famous opera houses in the world. It also serves as the concert hall for the the Sächsische Staatskapelle, the Saxon State Orchestra, which was founded by Elector Maurice in the 16th century. And here we come full circle. Well, in every other city, you would be done now. Having seen the more, or in often cases less, historic city center. Not so in Dresden. As you already know from yesterday, it's essential to see the beauty of the Dresden Elbe Valley. Best on a ride on a historic pedal steamer. The third must-do is a visit to the collection of the Dresden State Art Collections, which include some of the best museums in the world. It all started in the year 1560 with Elector Augustus, the brother of Maurice. By now you know what an elector is. First, the collection had a very universal character, focusing on tools, instruments, clocks, other technical devices, as well as costly and exotic items. But every ruler from the Wettin family added something to the collection, and art became much more important. So eventually it was divided up into specialized collections. In the royal palace that we're going to see now, you will find 3 collections. The Rüstkammer or Armory Museum, the Grünes Gewölbe or Green Vault, which is the Treasury Museum, and the Kupferstichkabinett, which is the collection of prints, drawings and photographs. So let's go inside and just catch a glimpse in the limited time that we have. We are in the small castle yard of Dresden's royal palace, which is in the Renaissance style. The royal palace has been rebuilt for the museums of the Dresden State Art Collections. It combines historic rooms and also modern museum rooms. Over here, that's where you buy the tickets. There are different tickets available. You can buy a ticket for all the museums of the Dresden State Art Collections, which includes museums in other buildings. You can buy a ticket just here for the Royal Palace. And there's a separate ticket for the historic Green Vault, the treasury chamber that Augustus the Strong built in the 18th century. However, the better pieces are in the new or modern Green Vault, which is 1 floor up, and that is included in the ticket for the Royal Palace. So don't get confused. Okay, let's go inside. The nicest way up to the historic rooms and all the treasures is on the so-called English staircase from the times of Augustus the Strong's elder brother. What makes the collections in Dresden so special is that after they were founded by the first Augustus in 1560, every ruler from the Wettin family, which ruled until 1918, added something to the collection. And also everything was preserved, from armor to clothes, from paintings to documents, from weapons to tools, from exotic things to specially created pieces of art. So it's amazing. Let's dive in. time to visit the splendid staterooms. They were created by Augustus the Strong to receive his son Augustus and his newlywed bride in 1719 after their wedding. Just for representational purposes. Highlights include the parade bedroom, the audience chamber, and lots of other rooms. In the lesser room, actually, you can see the clothes of Augustus the Strong, which are on display there. In one of the rooms, or one of the cabinets, you find one of the horseshoes that Augustus the Strong broke apart. For that, he wrote his own certificate to give to the man in charge of his collections. By the way, the wedding celebrations for his son lasted for 1 month, making it the biggest wedding of the Baroque times. This is how Augustus the Strong looked like when he was crowned King of Poland. This is really how he looked like, we know, because there's a wax mask from 1704 that shows his face. We are at the new Green Vault. Together with the historic Green Vault, it forms one of the best treasury museums in the world. There are many amazing pieces here. This one here might not be one of the most valuable, but certainly one of the most popular. It's a cherry pit with 185 faces on it. This is an incredible and absolutely unique piece of art. It shows the Indian Great Mughal Aurangzeb on the occasion of his birthday receiving gifts from all over his empire. The miniature is entirely made from gold, silver and precious stones, and it took 7 years to make it. It's not a fantasy, it was made after a book by a traveler who had attended Aurangzeb's birthday. This was created by the court jeweler of Augustus the Strong, Johann Melchior Dinglinger, and his brothers. And the whole room here is filled with works from their workshop. Absolutely amazing. This is the most expensive piece in the Green Vault, the so-called Dresden Green. It's a diamond that hails from India. Radioactivity gave it its distinctive green color, making it the largest of its kind in the world. It was purchased by Augustus Strong's son Augustus at the Leipzig Trade Fair and then made part of a head brim where it is surrounded by 413 other diamonds. This is the original of a monument attached to the fortifications of Dresden. It was the first large outdoor monument in Germany. It shows the deceased Elector Moritz handing over his electoral sword to his brother August. Want to see royal outfits from the 16th century? No problem. Go to a picture gallery and look at all the wonderful paintings. Or come here to the Royal Palace in Dresden and see the real things. And this carries on with clothes from the 17th and 18th century, since the Royal Palace takes you on a complete journey through the times of Renaissance and Baroque. The Ottoman Empire was a source of great fear for the European rulers. It was also a source of great inspiration. Here in the Turkish chamber, you find one of the best collections of Ottoman art or Ottoman-inspired art in the world. Behind me, you can see an original Turkish tent from the 17th century. The Hall of Giants is the largest room in the palace. Here, the world of knights tournaments come alive, which were popular until the 18th century. While other rooms were often only used for representation, the gate building were the preferred living quarters of the royal family. But what would life be without dancing? This is the small ballroom, created in the 19th century by a student of Gottfried Semper. Looks rather plain, but look up. Wow! So, how much more time is needed? Believe me, you can spend many hours here or even days in the museums of the State Art Collections. The new green vault is always a must. The staterooms are the new favorite. And there's so many other things to see. So, next time, make more time for it. Amazing, wasn't it? In 1168, silver ore was found in a place which is now the town of Freiberg, and Saxony became a wealthy region. Mining carried on for many centuries and still happening on a small scale today. Mining technology developed in leaps and bounds due to innovations made by the technical-minded Saxons. And when the industrial age dawned, Saxony was well prepared and quickly became the leading industrial region of Germany, with a large variety of industries. Growth was fueled by numerous innovations, some of which are still relevant today. Just to give you a practical example, the coffee filter was invented by a Dresden housewife who was fed up with the residue in her coffee. So she punched hole into a metal container, used the blotting paper of her son and created the first coffee filter. Later, is still a household name today when it comes to coffee and coffee making. The innovative spirit of the Saxons also paid off when it came to transportation. Yesterday, we traveled on a historic paddle steamer. In fact, the first German steamboat was built here in Dresden, as was the first German locomotive. The first long-distance railroad ran between Dresden and Leipzig, and the fast-growing railroad network included the largest brick bridge in the world, which still stands today, and also numerous narrow-gauge branch lines. On 4 of them, there are still steam trains today in daily operation. Now we're going to have our lunch in a restaurant which has a theme, historic transport. We're now going to have a meal in the Dresden 1900 restaurant, a period-style restaurant which is focused on historic transport. And we're going to have our meal in this wonderful old tram, which even has a name, Helene. Until 1945, Saxony was the most industrialized region of Germany. Of course, transportation played a very important role. So it's not surprising that the first long-distance railroad was from Dresden to Leipzig. Also, the first steam locomotive in Germany was built here in Dresden. Let's see what the chef has prepared for us.
So, einmal das Sauerbraten.
Ganz herzlichen Dank. Vielen Dank. This is a dish which is very popular in Saxony. It's marinated beef, soured beef, with dumplings and red cabbage. Enjoy. Vielen Dank. Another very typical Saxon dish. It is called Quarkkeulchen. Very difficult to translate. It's made from curd cheese and potatoes, and this is fried, and then there's sugar added to it, and apple sauce, or in this case kind of apple pieces, whatever you feel like. And this is served either as a dessert or even as a main course. So, let's see how it tastes. Now we know that Dresden is a very beautiful city. And we could spend much more time here because there's so much more to see and do. However, the area around Dresden is also very beautiful. Within an hour we could reach the Saxon wine region, the Ore Mountains, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, or the interesting area east of Dresden, which is called Upper Lusatia. Don't worry, we will do that all in the next few days. But let's start with the Saxon Switzerland National Park. It's an amazing landscape and a paradise for sightseeing, cycling, hiking and climbing. We could go there by steamboat, as I already mentioned, but we've already done a steamboat ride. We could also cycle along the Elbe cycle path. That's wonderful, but too much after this heavy lunch. Or we could take a commuter train. It only takes 45 minutes to get there. Same as driving time, by the way. Anyway, let's just go. We are at Königstein Fortress, only 45 minutes away from Dresden, by car or by coach. But you can also come here by commuter train from Dresden, by boat on the Elbe River, or by bicycle along the very popular Elbe cycle path. Normally, elevators take you up to the top, but we have elected to walk up the ramp towards the mighty gate. Königstein Fortress is one of the largest fortresses in Europe, sitting on a mountaintop. It started out in the 12th century, and some parts of the buildings go back to that time. Later, in the 16th century, it was briefly converted into a monastery to counter the Reformation. But that only lasted for 8 years, because most of the monks sympathized with the ideas of the reformer Martin Luther. At the end of the 16th century, the original castle was developed into a fortress, covering the whole Table Mountain. Also at the same time, some buildings for festivities were erected. Over the centuries that followed, more and more things were added, and that only stopped at the end of the 19th century, when the fortress became obsolete. All in all, there are more than 50 buildings here. So let's go and explore. But first, we have to enter through the gate and walk up the impressive French ramp. Königstein Fortress was a safe place for the royal family during times of unrest and war. And the treasures of Saxony were also always safe between these thick walls. The so-called Magdalene Castle served for festivities and as living quarters for members of the royal family. It was later converted into a storage for food supplies. Between 1722 and 1725, Augustus the Strong had the so-called large Königstein wine barrel installed here. It held almost 250,000 liters of wine. It was only filled once and was removed in 1818 due to the bad state it was in. A more pressing issue was the supply of water. Rainwater just wasn't enough. So between 1563 and 1569, the second deepest well of Germany was cut through the bare rock by Saxon miners. An incredible task. Today, there are demonstrations here on how deep this well is. Come, let's have a look. The well is 152 meters deep, and it takes the water that is poured down 16 seconds to reach the bottom. The chapel was erected in its present form in the Baroque times. During the communist rule, it was misused first as a storage and later as a cinema. The damage is still visible, but otherwise it has been beautifully restored. In the oldest part of the fortress, going back to the original castle, there's a wonderful exhibition on the history of Königstein Fortress. It is said that Königstein Fortress was never conquered, but this is not entirely true. In 1848, after making a bet in a drunken state, a chimney sweep called Sebastian Abratzky managed to climb up the upright sandstone rock into the walls of the fortification, and he was promptly imprisoned. Today, rock climbers still climb up the so-called Abratzky chimney, and these days it goes unpunished. So much to see and so much to learn. In World War I and World War II, Königstein Fortress served as a prisoner of war camp. Königstein Fortress had illustrious guests like Napoleon. Others were less welcome. It also served as a prison for political prisoners and alleged enemies of the state. In 1955, Königstein Fortress was turned into a museum. Today it has more than 500,000 visitors every year. They also enjoy the food served in the restaurants and in the Fortress bakery, but also in the casemates, where they can enjoy it while there is a show that takes them back to various periods of time. Augustus the Strong loved to party. This was his favorite place. This two-story building has a banquet hall on top with a table that could be lowered all the way to the ground floor, where it would be restocked with food and drink by the servants. So there was no need to endure their presence. Isn't that ultimate private dining? If you're not interested in history and architecture, there's always the 365-degree panoramic views of the Saxon Switzerland National Park. It is a dramatic landscape made of table mountains and rock formations along the Elbe River. And they are dense forests like straight out of Grimm's fairy tales. This landscape carries on the other side of the border as Bohemian Switzerland. In fact, the Czech border is only 20 kilometers or 20 minutes away from here. Königstein, the King's Rock, is the most famous table mountain in Saxon Switzerland National Park. But it is rivaled by the most famous rock formation, the Bastei. So, let's go on a scenic drive. So why is this national park called Saxon Switzerland? Well, the Elbe Sandstone Mountains have always attracted people and artists. This place was already painted in the Baroque times. But in the 19th century, two Swiss painters, Adrian Zing and Anton Graf, came here to create. And this area reminded them so much of their home that they started writing letters to their families saying, "Greetings from Saxon Switzerland." And this name stuck. Now, today there are more than 100 Switzerlands in Germany, but this is the original one and certainly the most beautiful. Tourism also took off in the 19th century. And the Bastei, the rock formation where we are now, was immediately in the focus. By the way, Bastei is the German word for bastion. The building that you see behind me is the so-called Swiss Chalet. It's the oldest part of the Berg Hotel Bastei. This hotel is perfect for honeymooners and of course for everybody else who wants to spend more time in this special place. Saxon Switzerland has many rock formations, but the Bastei seems to be everyone's favorite. The rock formation and table mountains are the remains of what used to be the bottom of an ocean. Often you can see climbers on the rocks. To protect the sensitive sandstone, they are not allowed to use any tools. This was regulated in the so-called Saxon climbing rules. In the 1920s, a climber from Saxon Switzerland took these rules with him to America and developed the whole thing into what we call today free climbing. The Bastei is also famous for the stone bridge from the mid-19th century, which replaced an earlier wooden one. Early pictures were taken here by Hermann Krone, a pioneer of photography and the father of the Dresden camera industry. There's an inscription up there telling us that he was the first to paint here with light. In the background, you see the remains of an old castle called Neuraten, which sat amongst these stones that you see in the background. Isn't this place amazing? What's even more amazing is that there is no entrance fee for the Bastei. The only thing you have to pay for is the parking, and that's a small fee too. You can also come here by steamboat or on the commuter trains from Dresden, if you're willing to climb up to this spot. You can also use public transport in such a way that it will take you right here to the Bastei. So there are many ways to enjoy it. So, aren't you hungry now? I am. Let's go and check out the wonderful Panorama restaurant. When the new hotel was built in the 1970s, it also gained this panorama restaurants with hundreds of seats and a stunning view of the Saxon Switzerland region. Before we see what the chef has prepared for us, let's have a toast with some sparkling wine with raspberry. Cheers! Oh, vielen Dank.
Bitte schön. Lassen Sie es sich schmecken.
Dankeschön. I love soups, and this is a special one. It's essence of forest mushroom with delicious little meatballs and some vegetables. Enjoy.
So, und ich bringe Ihnen den Hirschgulasch.
Oh,
Bitte schön.
wunderbar.
Ein guter Appetit.
Let's go wild now. This is goulash from venison with dumplings and red cabbage. Almost 30% of Saxony is covered with forests, so there's unlimited supply. Enjoy.
Habe ich einmal den Apfelstrudel für Sie dabei.
Oh,
Bitte schön, ne? Lassen Sie es
wonderful. Dankeschön. I'm sure you've seen this before. It's warm apple strudel, but with vanilla ice cream, vanilla sauce and cream, the deluxe version. I'm sure you love it. I will. Now we need a glass of Bastei Bitter, a herbal liquor. Cheers again. Time for another nightcap at Frank's Bar. Let's see what Ilya has created for us today. It's a hurricane, but not New Orleans style, but Frank style. Let's see what he puts in there. It's Old Pascas rum, passion fruit syrup, roses, lime and lemon juice, and pineapple and orange juice. Unlike the original, it's not very sweet and very refreshing. So, cheers. Now would be the time to deal with your questions, but I've only seen one. Somebody wanted a recipe for Ilya's drink from last night. Remember, we had a liquid form of the Black Forest cake. But sorry, that's Ilya's special recipe. It will remain a secret. Please come to Dresden and try it here in the bar. And maybe then you can talk him into giving it away. So, what else is there? I think we're done for today. Let's look at tomorrow. In any case, I'll be around. If you have questions, I will answer them afterwards. Tomorrow, we go to the cradle of Saxony. We will also go to the place with the highest Instagrammability. And I promise you, there'll be plenty of alcohol again. So, for now, I say good night to you. Don't be strangers. See you all in the morning and have a good night. Gute Nacht.